These are 5 terms that every videographer or filmmaker needs to know to master video. They're in no particular order, but let's start with the aperture of your lens. Now, aperture, or f-stop, or in some cases even t-stop, dictates how much light is allowed to go through your lens and actually onto your camera's sensor. Put simply, the lower the aperture number, the wider it's going to be. And as the number goes up, the aperture actually closes down, which lets less light through. And that will also affect your depth of field. So if you want those super nice looking shots with the really blurred out backgrounds, you're gonna want that aperture to be as wide open as possible. Second, we're gonna talk about the ISO, which kind of goes hand in hand with the aperture that we just talked about. Now, the ISO actually controls how sensitive your camera's sensor is to the light that's coming through the aperture of the lens. Now, a higher ISO will actually make your sensor more sensitive to the light coming through the lens, which will actually brighten up the image. But there is a trade-off there. As your ISO gets raised higher, the more noise or grain is introduced into the footage. Now, to avoid that, in most cases, you'll want to keep your ISO as close to your camera's native ISO as possible. Now, in most cases, for most cameras, it's going to be right around 100 to 400. Or even in some cases, like the cameras that I use, the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema series, they have dual native ISOs, one at 400 and another one at 3200. The third thing we're going to talk about is shutter speed. And if you're not completely new to video, you might notice that this is the third point of the exposure triangle. And if you are completely new to video and you would like a better breakdown of what the exposure triangle is and how it affects your footage, let me know down in the comments and I will do my best to make that video for you. Now, shutter speed actually affects how your motion looks in your video. Now, the main thing you're gonna want to know is the higher the number or the faster your shutter speed is, the less motion blur there's going to be. But again, there is that trade-off where if you increase the shutter speed, it's going to make your image darker. To get the most cinematic look with your footage, you're going to want your shutter speed to be double of whatever your frame rate is. So if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, you'll want your shutter speed at 50. And since we just talked about shutter speed, I guess we should also talk about frame rate. Now, the frame rate you choose to film in is completely up to you and whatever project that you're working on. Typically, if you want your project to look more cinematic, you will shoot at 24 frames per second and edit at 24 frames per second in your editor of choice. If you're making videos for social media, typically 30 frames per second is perfectly fine. Some platforms offer 60 frame per second playback, and if you want a smoother feeling video, then you can film at 60. And frame rates of 60 frames per second or higher can typically be slowed down in post for smooth, crisp, slow motion. And lastly is white balance. White balance is one of those things that's really gonna separate your footage from the absolute beginner looking way more professional. Picking the right white balance for the scene that you're shooting is paramount to having your footage look good. Otherwise, it can look way too warm and all the whites can be orange or too cold. Now, in most cases, you don't have to get it exactly correct in camera because in post, you can adjust it a little bit. But if your white balance is way off, if you attempt to fix it in post, your footage could start to fall apart. And that brings us to the end of the video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please hit that subscribe button for more filmmaking tips and short films coming in the future. And let me know in the comments what else you would like to see me make videos on, and I will see you guys in the next one.